if you were to go around floating the idea that we're all unavoidably insincere in our everyday state of consciousness, at any rate, then you wouldn't get very far, obviously enough. Most of us would not see any sense in this idea at all. And it's probably true to say that no matter how eloquent you might be, no matter how good you might be at putting the argument across, in a light-hearted way, in the spirit of fun, not because you're proselytizing, spreading the doctrine, you still wouldn't have any chance of getting it across. You'd be a lone voice crying out in the wilderness, as it is said. And that's about the size of it, really. But then again, on the other side of it, on the other hand, we can say it depends who you're hanging out with. If you're hanging out with a bunch of recovering addicts, and I don't think this is necessarily true for all addicts, but definitely if you've started moving in the direction of recovering from addiction, then if you say something like that, if you say, everything I say is insincere, or I can't help from being insincere, or something to that effect, absolutely everyone in the room will know exactly what you mean straight away. There'll be no problem at all. Every one of us who has ever been in a state of addiction will know that feeling. That's the territory of addiction all over, really. The territory of addiction is that. I keep on making protestations that I want to be free from the addiction and move on from whatever it is. And I'll say that till I'm blue in the face. Partly it might be to convince others so they will tolerate me, but for the most part it's to convince myself. And I never tire of trying to convince myself in that way, that there is something in me, that there is this sincere core in me that wants to be free. So by going through this journey of addiction, one thing we discover is that the insincerity goes very deep. It goes incredibly deep. And all of the energy we're putting out to apparently be free from the addiction, and all of our protestations and assertions and promises to ourselves or to others, that all of this activity is purely for the sake of fooling ourselves. And then a bit later on, we'll come out with the same thing again. But I really do mean it this time, I'll say. And I'll say that so often that I'll get very, very sick of hearing myself say it. And that's the journey of addiction. The discovery that one isn't the master of one's own house. So this idea is absolutely readily understandable if you're talking to recovering addicts. No problem there at all. And the situation is that the rest of us haven't got that much insight, basically. It's not that we're in some way better than addicts or recovering addicts, much as we might like to think so. The thing is that we just haven't got that insight. We haven't been through the pain that it takes to bring about that insight. So addiction's one area, and another area where this principle of insincerity applies, really interestingly, is in the fields of self-development or spirituality and all that kind of stuff, that kind of area. Now, absolutely, if you go and start talking to people that are into this kind of scene and suggest that there is this principle which says we're all totally insincere, especially when we avow that we're interested in becoming more spiritual, I reckon that this suggestion would not go down well, and it would not meet with understanding, as it would in a room full of recovering addicts. I imagine you wouldn't get listened to at all if you tried to talk about this principle, this idea. And the reason for that is, of course, that people that are into self-development and being more spiritual have less insight, possibly even less insight into this than the average kind of regular person who isn't into that trip. So that's a strange thing. The energy we put into trying to spiritually better ourselves, generally speaking, though not always, it doesn't have to be the case, it just usually is the case, comes from the denial of who we are, the denial of our own darkness. So the goal of being able to live a more spiritual life, the reason that shines out to us so much isn't because of any inherent virtue in the spiritual life, which we know nothing about anyway. Our idea of the spiritual life is just an idea, it's a projection. And so the glitteringness, the attractiveness, the shine that is on this idea of leading a more spiritual life doesn't really come from any value in this supposed spiritual life that we're aiming at. All it is a reversed form of the fear that we feel towards ourselves as we actually are. So if we apply this yardstick, which we are entitled to do, we can see the people that are most spiritual, in inverted commas, very often turn out to be the people who are running away from themselves the most. And that accounts for the well-known fact that often in these cases where people are really straining to get down the spiritual path, that accounts for why they're so often obnoxious. So-called spiritual toxicity. They haven't got time for anyone who doesn't aspire to the same values as themselves, and they look down on people like that for the simple reason that that's what they're like, and they're in denial of it. So that's always what causes that kind of condemnatory, negative, toxic outlook. It's always because we're in denial of that, whatever it is we're being judgmental towards. We're in denial of it in ourselves, as Jung says. Now, this may not seem particularly obvious, and very often it's far from obvious. But if we think about people that are very aggressively religious, we can of course see this truth much more clearly. So when it comes to the God Squad, the heavy-duty God Squad, the Bible bashers, the lads who really want to spread their faith, this is an insincere act. It absolutely is monstrously insincere. As Jung says, whenever there is this fanatic fervour of the believer, that fanatic fervour is really just a sign of their inner doubt. So because of their inner doubt, which they're not owning up to, we have to put up with all this stuff that comes about as a result of this religious fervour, this fanaticism. So we might look at people who are very strong in their belief and who claim to be strong in their belief and claim to be strong in the right belief, that they claim that their belief is the right belief. And whilst, if we look at that phenomenon on a superficial or kind of naive, in a naive way, I think, well, here's someone who's got a lot of belief. But the absolute reverse of that is true. Here is someone who doubts what they are saying, what they are espousing. So if I go around, just to give a very simplistic example, if I go around saying, I believe in God, I'm putting a lot of energy into that, like it's kind of important to me that I get to say it, and I want to. It's important to me that I take this position. Then we know what that really means is I don't believe in God. And this is the paradoxical or self-contradictory nature of all literal assertions, not just those made in a religious arena. If I tell you, you can trust me, you absolutely can trust me, so don't worry, it's okay, you can trust me. That really means you can't trust me. You can't trust me as far as you can throw me. That's what I'm telling you. When I say you can trust me, I'm really saying you can't trust me. So this is another example of the self-contradictoriness that's inherent in our way of life when we are living on the basis of the thinking mind, when we're being guided by the thinking mind in everything. And it's also a nice clear example of insincerity, of the monster of insincerity. What is true doesn't need to be said. That doesn't mean we can't say it. When we do say it, it's in a gentle kind of a way. We're not trying to prove anything by saying it. We're being humorous more than anything else by saying it. And so, bearing that in mind, when we look at the world of religion and the dreadful, appalling seriousness that's inherent in it, and that is that we see every time we encounter religion, we know that, for the most part, conventional or mass religion is a huge exercise in insincerity. So insincerity is invisible to us. We don't see it. We don't see the insincerity of the believer. We're hoodwinked. We're taken in at face value. And this same principle is true for all social groups. When we are part of a social group, we are making a statement that the values of this group are my values. I totally go along with them and agree with them. And that's why I'm in the group. That's why I'm in the club. But that's insincere. We don't really mean it. Like, I know we're not going around saying that to everyone we meet, but we're implying it just as clearly as if we had said it. And the reason it's insincere is because when I join a group, I don't join the group because I think what the values that group is formed on are true or worth upholding or anything like that. I join a group because I want to be accepted by the group and have this sense of belonging. So when I agree with someone, as Kurt Vonnegut says, I don't agree with them because I think what they've said is true, which would seem to be the only reason that I would agree with someone. I agree with them as a way of being friends with them. It's kind of as if I'm saying, well, will you be my friend? I'll agree with you. Will you be my friend? So human beings agree with each other on a global scale. And we do this out of our need to be accepted, to be part of the gang. This doesn't mean that we can never agree with a statement made by another person and for that just to be an honest agreement. But in terms of conditioning, in terms of beliefs, in terms of the way of life that we accept and go along with, the very fact that we go along with it, as I was saying, implies that we believe in it. But it's just a convenience, really. All we would need to do is look at the way of life that we've created for ourselves, the capitalist or consumer way of life, that is, the global mega culture that is spreading all over the world. Nobody can actually look at that and say it's good, it's worth anything. But it's convenient that we do go along with it. And so then straight away, that makes all of us insincere. If we were sincere, we'd object. And not just in a poser type way, so as to say, oh, I'm standing up for something that everyone else doesn't, or I'm being a rebel in some sense. But in a real sense, we would not have anything to do with it at all. The idea that sincerity is the key in what you might refer to as a genuine religion or a genuine spiritual movement, if there is such a thing. We can assume that there is such a thing. Is exemplified by the idea that the Pure Lands sect of Buddhism has put forward. And it used to be the case that in Pure Land Buddhism, the practice was to chant the name of Amida Buddha over and over again. So it was a simplistic practice. It's not a simplistic practice, a simple practice. That's all there is to it. And then this has become refined, maybe not with all the Pure Land Buddhists, but there has been this refinement that all that is necessary in life is for us to ask Amida Buddha to help us. Just once, that'll do, but it has to be with sincerity. And of course it doesn't have to be Amida Buddha. We can use any term we want to. But we have to ask sincerely. And that really is the great difficulty, because even though that may seem like an awfully simple way to find redemption or to find liberation, just sincerely ask for help, this turns out to be not such a simple or easy thing at all. It isn't simple or easy because it's so very hard for us to be sincere. So we might think, oh, that's a doddle, really. I don't have to do all these spiritual practices that the other guys do. I'm just going to go for the shortcut and just ask Amida Buddha to save me. And then I discovered that what seems like a very simple, easy thing is like an impossibility. How the hell do I go around get to the point of being sincere? And really what we can say to round this all up is that the psychological ego or self can never, ever, ever be sincere, either in what it says or thinks or does. That's its defining limitation. The defining limitation of the self is that it can never, ever be sincere. It can do anything else. You name it, whatever you want, anything else, but it can't be sincere. So that's the situation of the psychological ego or self. And if we were to ask, but why the hell not? Bit of a sweeping statement, isn't it, to say that the conditioned self can never be sincere? It's a very sweeping statement to make there. What are the grounds for making this statement? What's your basis for saying this? And the basis is very simple. The basis is that who we are is not this conditioned self, this psychological ego. That's not who we are. So as long as we keep on pretending that it is who we are, how the hell can we be sincere? Okay, thanks for watching.